Moscow Human Rights Commission, and I just want to thank you so much for being here today. We're going to have a great talk here. I want to let you know that this talk today, there may be some trigger warnings or some triggering for some individuals. And we have Hayden back there at Alternatives Violence on the Palouse. So if you need to go talk to him during the event, afterwards, he's welcome. You're welcome to go do that. At the back table also we have some resource materials if you want to further your knowledge on the subject. And now I'll introduce Natalie Rose Greenfield. Over the course of planning this event, I've had the pleasure to get to know her a little bit more. She is a mother, life partner, business owner, and she's also a passionate advocate for sexual abuse. So she shares her story of the long-term sexual abuse that she suffered, as well as the subsequent shaming that came afterwards. And she is now blessed to be years down the road of recovery, and so here is Natalie.
Thank you. Hey guys, thanks for being here tonight. I'm happy to be here with you to talk about sexuality education and shaming and some really important things. So I appreciate each of you coming. And I want to start off by saying that I don't have any special college degrees or specific certifications that qualify me to be here talking to you tonight. But I have a lot of personal experience, and through my advocacy work, I interact with a lot of survivors and victims of abuse. And I would like to think that I might have some helpful or encouraging information to share with you. So if you are expecting someone with an Ivy League degree, then you might want to pop out. Anybody? Okay, you're good? Well, thanks. All right, so let's talk about sex. Yeah, instantly half the room is like, oh, you know what? I got a thing. I gotta go. In all seriousness, though, I want to start off by talking about our preconceived notions about what sex education is. And I know it might be different for everybody, and maybe some of you grew up in a school setting where you had some kind of sex ed class, maybe you didn't have any, maybe you never talked about sex in your home, it was really like off limits or taboo. For me personally, I was homeschooled along with my 3 older brothers, and we were raised in a conservative religious environment, talking about our bodies, sexuality, relationships, that kind of thing was just off limits. It was something that didn't happen, and there was never like an established rule that we don't talk about this. It was just unspoken. You just knew you don't talk about it. So when until pretty recently, when I thought about like what a sex ed class was, I would picture, I never had the experience of like a classroom setting, being homeschooled, so I would picture like a classroom of super awkward teenagers with a super awkward teacher talking to them about adult reproductive behavior, right? And the truth is, when sexuality and relationship education is done in a healthy, age-appropriate way, it's not that at all. That is a facet of sexuality education at some point in time, but really, what sexuality education is, and I'll read the description that I did not come up with, that is a nice, rounded, centered description of it. Sexuality education is a lifelong process of acquiring information and forming attitudes, beliefs, and values. It encompasses sexual development, sexual and reproductive health, interpersonal relationships, affection, intimacy, body image, and gender roles. So really, it's a whole lot more than just sex. And I think that healthy sexuality and relationship education needs to start at a really young age, and I'm going to talk about why. I think that when we talk with kids in an age-appropriate way, that their little minds, at whatever point of development they're at, that they can wrap their little minds around, I think it helps them to develop a healthy sense of their own bodies, of themselves, of the way that they relate to and interact with other people. And I think that all children, as utopic as this might sound, need to have a safe space to ask questions and to learn about all of these different things. I have 3 little ones at home and 1 on the way. I have a 1-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And my husband and I, we're not experts and we're learning as we go, but we've been talking about this stuff with our kids since they were really little. And I think it starts with things like establishing healthy boundaries and talking about appropriate and inappropriate touch and how to respect another person's, personal space and what all those things mean. And even though it's technically not sex education, it is laying a basis and a foundation for human interaction. Because really, from the time we're born, we're sexual creatures. That's how it is. And I think that there are healthy and appropriate ways to talk about this stuff with kids from a really young age. So one thing that I would like to talk about is, if you take just a second and just think about how you learned about sex. What age you were, what method you learned about sex from, and it's probably a little different for everybody. Maybe some of us learned about it the same way. But chances are a lot of us didn't probably learn about sex in a really healthy, nurturing, safe environment where you could ask questions and bounce ideas off of somebody and satisfy your curiosity while also being presented with a healthy view of things. That was not the case for me, personally, and I do want to clarify really quickly here. I do this at most of my talks. I have a wonderful relationship with both of my parents, and while they did things differently, some things differently than I will do with my own children, I understand that they loved us very dearly, and I think even the most loving, most well-intentioned parents can make mistakes in this way. Obviously we make mistakes in pretty much, all kinds of different ways with our children. But I do think that being mindful about this stuff is really important. So I'm going to tell you a few stories. And the first story that I want to tell you about is I want to talk about how I learned about sex and how sexuality was presented to me. Like I said before, it was really limited in our household. We didn't ask questions. We couldn't say words like penis and vagina. We could say like privates, and that was it. You didn't say anything else. And so when I was 11, my mom came to me and she said, "Natalie, we have a new subject on the schedule, on our homeschool schedule." And I said, "Okay." She goes, "Okay, well, come with me." And she took me into the schoolroom, and we shut the door, and it was like I don't know, there's something very different about it. It didn't feel like going in to do our math lesson. And she pulled out this book, and I still can remember it very clearly. It was this like square book, it was teal, and it had this big like colored in circle in the middle, and above it just said period. And I was like, okay, whatever, what's that? And over the next few weeks we went through this book where I learned about the function of my menstrual cycle. It was a faith-based book. It did not, I've been wanting to go online and order the book so I can remember exactly how it did this, but somehow it managed to pretty much inform me about what menstruation was without involving like the male reproductive side of things in any way, shape, or form. So it's very one-sided, and I remember being like kind of confused, like, okay, well, why does this happen? So I learned the basic function of like my ovaries and my uterus and all that good stuff, and that was it. And so I thought, okay, whatever. The boys were never allowed in the room. We could never say the word period around anybody. Which I'll just interject here that no matter what the intention behind that was, it inherently established a sense of shame around things. So, it was secret. We couldn't talk to anybody about it. It was embarrassing. And before I even started my period, I remember feeling like, this is embarrassing. This is, it's something that I have to go through as a girl, and good grief, how am I going to sneak through the grocery store to find, tampons or pads or whatever I need? And so there was a basis of, rather than, feeling empowered about the amazing functioning of the human body and, what women's bodies can do, which is, sort of uniquely incredible, I was embarrassed and I felt ashamed. So, that was the extent of any sort of introduction to sexuality that I had. About a year later, when I was 12, I started getting curious about things. And I remember, like, I didn't even know quite what I was curious about, but I wanted to know, I didn't even know what I wanted to know. I wanted to know what made the world go round. And I knew I probably couldn't ask about it. I knew I definitely couldn't ask about it. And I knew I hadn't been taught about it yet, but I really wanted to know. And it went on for a while. Man, I felt so curious about stuff, and nobody had ever said anything to me about sex. Like, I didn't even know. So I went in my room, and I pulled the 4-pound Webster dictionary off the shelf, and I got to work. So I started, okay, well, how do, there's gotta be, like, everything's in the dictionary, right? And so I started looking up words that I knew, like, I think I started with, like, breasts or, like, bottom or something, which really did not lead anywhere exciting. So I moved on. I thought about, like, okay, what are the words that I know that are, like bad words? Then I looked up, like, penis or vagina, and then we really got somewhere. But, like, the dictionary definition, it'll have the definition at the end, it'll say C, some different thing. So over the next couple of weeks, every day I would go down to my room and get the dictionary out, and I learned everything that I knew about sex from the dictionary, which has its advantages. So if you think about it, our youth, most of our youth, learns about sex, sadly, not from trusted, loving individuals that care about them and that are responsible for guiding and teaching them, but from friends, through experimentation, through the internet, and you got it, through pornography, right? None of those methods of learning about sex are realistic. They're not healthy. Most times that, say, a young boy learns about sex from a friend, that friend most likely learned what he knows about sex from pornography. And pornography presents really kind of a fantasy, right? It's not realistic. It's not how things actually are. And so we end up with youth that either get one side of the coin, which is that taboo, don't talk about it. We don't talk about it in good or bad ways. You don't get to know anything. Abstain from it. Don't do it until you're married, and that's all you get to know. Or they get the other side, which is this constant media bombardment of, like, what sex looks like and what our bodies need to look like, and it's all this, it's fake. Or learning from friends or pornography. And they're two extremes, and neither is realistic and neither is healthy. And so what we end up with is this whole, generation after generation of youth that are very, very confused. Meanwhile, they're getting older. They're clumsily lumbering toward relationships and figuring out their own sexuality and all these really integral essential parts of being a human. And they're really terribly misinformed. And I think that is something that we have a responsibility as a culture to start to change. So back to my dictionary story. The upside of that story is that I did get pretty factual, realistic information. So I didn't get, it wasn't fake. I definitely learned the scientific functioning of the human body. I probably knew more than most 12-year-olds knew about how things worked at that point. The downside is that the dictionary did not teach me about boundaries. It didn't teach me about sexual coercion or sexual pressure. It didn't teach me about predators, inappropriate touch, sexual abuse, nothing like that, nothing like what to watch out for. It didn't equip me for how to respond to any unfortunate situations that I might get into someday. And with the statistics, I think we all know that it's, it's very likely that our young people will be faced with some kind of abuse situation at some point before they turn 18. Most of us, many of us in this room were faced with some kind of abusive situation in our youth. And so it really is realistic to focus on teaching our children about how to respond if they are ever in a situation where they face something that nobody should have to face, but that a lot of people do. So, learned about sex from the dictionary when I was 12, and it didn't teach me those things that would have been good for me to know. So, a year and a half later, when I was 14, And I was several months into a relationship with a man 10 years older than me who had been, he spent several months grooming me for the abuse that would begin to take place. But up until this point, he had established a friendship with me, established kind of a sense of secrecy and trust. There had not been any overt like sexual contact or anything up until this point. And I knew that something was off and weird, but I felt special and I felt flattered and that he paid attention to me. What I did not know, what I was not equipped for, was how to answer him when I was 14 and he was 24, and he asked if I'd ever given anybody a hand job before. He asked in different words, but the idea was clear. And it stopped me dead in my tracks, and my heart started pounding, and I felt all kinds of things that I had no idea how to reconcile or how to process them. And my brain was screaming, no, this is not okay, get away. But I trusted this person. I was very close with him. We had this, special friendship. And I was experiencing what I now know to be, a highly abusive, inappropriate sexual pressure and coercion. But I didn't know that at the time. And I would like to think that if I had been more informed, that maybe I would have been able to say, no, that's not okay. I don't want to do that. I didn't know how to do that. So I said, okay, and I plunged into this downward spiral that would, start the next year and a half of the horrific sexual abuse that I suffered that nearly led me to commit suicide. I know it's not a story that everyone experiences, but I also know that it's a kind of story that many, many people experience. And I don't think necessarily that informing and equipping our youth to face these kind of experiences, there's no guarantee that it's gonna eliminate them suffering abuse. I think that there are people that were raised in homes where there was a safe environment to talk about this stuff and where they did get the kind of education and information that they needed. And some of those people still go on to be in abusive relationships. And I know that there's nothing like fail-proof about this stuff, but I do think that if we start to have more open conversations with our children, if we start to establish environments where they can ask questions about their bodies and where we teach them about boundaries and how to respond to these kinds of situations, I do think that we would begin to see a downward turn in the epidemic of sexual abuse that we have.